Hi there, and thanks for joining me. This video is called Going from Vision to Reality, or as I've been calling it, the tale of three arcs. And looking at this theme of taking things from an idea to actually being a real solid thing in front of you. The reason I'm doing this video is because so often I meet people who say that they've got this amazing idea from God, but they don't know where to start, and they don't know what way to put it all into process, or sometimes get lost en route. So this video has really come out of chatting with lots of different creatives and chatting with different people about the visions and the ideas that God has given them, and just trying to see that through. The worst thing we can do sometimes is have an idea or something that we really believe, like a vision that God has put in our hearts, and not bring it through to completion. It just leads to more and more frustration and a sense of being lost and not really knowing what we're supposed to do. One of the things that I often hear from people when we're talking about vision and ideas and maybe the plan that God has for us is, I've quite often heard people say that if God has a plan, He's going to make it happen. But I don't think it's always like that. There's this moment in the Bible where God's people, they've been given a big vision. They've been told that they're going to be able to go in and have the promised land, that God was going to give them this promised land. But they come to this fairly major obstacle en route. And the obstacle is, as you find in the book of Joshua, the River Jordan. Now when they get to that river, they find that it's in flood, which meant that at some points that river was up to a mile wide, which represents a fairly serious obstacle in the plans that the people might believe God had for them. Now, they could have just sat there and said, well, if God wants it to happen, He's going to just do it. But God says to them to take the ark with the priests. The priests were to take the ark and then go and stand in the river. Now, when they did what they were told, and they actually partnered with God in that, when the Israelites took the ark into the river, the Bible says that God performed this miracle and He stopped up the river. It actually says that the waters were piled up in a heap further inland, further upstream. And then God's people were able to make their way across the River Jordan into the Promised Land. But it was dependent on them actually partnering with God and doing something about what God had said. It didn't just happen. And I think this is really key in how we walk forward into the things of God. That we don't just say, right, God said it, so it's going to happen. It's so often dependent. We see it so often in the Bible that God says He'll do something, but God's people have to partner with God to see God's plans come to action. And we're going to get into this a little bit further as we move on. to tell you the story of somebody else who had a big vision, and also the story of another ark. We found out a little bit about Joshua and the way him and the people had to take the Ark of the Covenant across the River Jordan. I want to tell you another story about somebody who actually became I think fair to say, a fantastic carpenter. And his name is Noah. So in Genesis 5, from verse 32, we read this. So after Noah was 500 years old, he became the father of Shem, Ham and Japheth. Now he was a righteous and blameless man among the people of his time, and he walked faithfully with God. Now Noah had, as we know, these 3 sons. And the Bible says the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and it was full of violence. Now God saw how bad it had all got, and how all the people had just become so corrupt in all their ways. So God said, Noah, I'm going to put an end to all people, for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I'm surely going to destroy both them and the earth. So make yourself an ark out of cypress wood. Make rooms in it and coat it with pitch, inside and out. And this is how you are to build it. The ark is to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. Make a roof for it, leaving below the roof an opening 1 cubit. 1 cubit high all around. Put a door in the side of the ark, and make lower, middle and upper decks. I'm going to bring floodwaters on the earth to destroy all life under the heavens, every creature that has the breath of life in it. Everything on earth will perish. But I will establish my covenant with you. And you will enter the ark, you and your sons and your wife and your sons' wives with you. You are to bring into the ark 2 of all living creatures, male and female, to keep them alive with you. 2 of every kind of bird, of every kind of animal, and every kind of creature that moves along the ground will come to you to be kept alive. You are to take every kind of food that is to be eaten and store it away as food for you and them. Now Noah did just as he was commanded. He followed it to the letter. And then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and your whole family, because I have found you righteous in this generation. Take with you 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, a male and its mates, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, a male and its mate. And also 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female, to keep their various kinds alive throughout the earth. 7 days from now I will send rain on earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe from the face of the earth every living creature I have made. And Noah did all that God had commanded him. That's a fairly hefty vision and a fairly big job to have to do. You know, in this video we're talking about this whole idea of going from vision to reality. Now Noah is given a huge task, a huge job to do. And the ark wasn't going to build itself. We don't know if Noah was a good carpenter beforehand, but he made the ark. That's a pretty, if nothing else, a pretty steep learning curve, and God has given us some ideas. Now I'm going to show in a minute on this video a picture which hugely inspires me, and it's called Noah's Study. And it's this picture which is, it's got Noah bent down in the corner, and the artist has left it up to us really to make out what we think of that picture. But to me it looks like Noah is just crying out to God and just exhausted maybe from a hard day's work. But on his desk there's this, like, a drawing of the ark, and I think Noah must have gone through such a process to go from having this vision, this idea, to actually bringing it to pass. It must have taken some work. We don't know if he ever experimented making boats or not, but there's a huge process to go from what we hear in the Bible to having a solid, made, built ark in front of you, which is big enough to take all these living creatures. And I think apparently it's reckoned that the ark would have been the biggest ocean-going vessel up until the time of the Titanic. At one point I sat down, I must have had extra time on my hands, and looked at how Noah would have built the ark, going back to some of the oldest recorded ways that we can find of boat building. And apparently they would have laid a plank like this and another plank underneath it, almost like in a brickwork sort of fashion, you know, slightly offset where the ends of the planking finished. But also behind that, they would have had another row of the same, all sealed together with pitch, but then with doweling rods pushed through, drilled through each of these planks to help them stay together. And I worked out roughly how many planks it would have taken, but then also how many doweling rods. And it works out roughly that it would have taken Noah 2 years worth of making little round doweling rods. 2 years of that. I mean, that is some act of faith. We don't know how much ridicule or not Noah actually had, but in my mind, this idea of people walking past Noah and saying, "Oh, how's it going today, Noah?" And him sat there saying, "Seen this lot behind me?" And him just sat there with a pile of these doweling rods stacked up behind him. Wouldn't have been difficult for people to think that he was absolutely crazy and completely misguided and delusional. We don't really know exactly what people thought from Scripture, but what we do know is that Noah was given a huge, huge task, a huge vision, and he had to work. He had to work it out. He had to work with principle, through the principles of working out how this was going to work. And I find that hugely encouraging, this idea that God gives us an idea, but then we have to work with God and we have to partner with him to bring that idea, that vision, from the start to the end, that end product in front of us. And God helps us every step of the way. I bet there were numerous times when Noah must have prayed and asked God what to do next, and asked God for wisdom and understanding, you know, not just the knowledge of, you know, wood will float, but how am I going to put it together? I bet Noah prayed loads. And we're going to look a little bit in a minute at another ark. So this is the third ark that I'm going to introduce you to in today's video. And this building I put together a few years back now, around about 10-11 years ago. And we found that this particular part of our garden used to get very wet. In fact, at least that much underwater quite often. And we had this bit of dead space at the end of the garden. So we were wondering what to do with it. At that particular time, I'd just sort of, well, handed in my notice on a job that I had. So because God was leading me into doing more artwork and more painting. So I'd handed in my notice, and I was working, doing a lot of artwork in the house, and we decided as a family that I probably needed more space for paint and all the rest of the creative stuff that I was doing. So we decided to try and use a dead bit of land to make into a sort of art studio. Unfortunately, it's become a little bit of a storage area for other things we're involved in, but that was the idea. So to build this thing, I had to go through a process, and we called this building the Ark because when I was building it, that whole time, it took around about 8 months in between me doing other work to build, and that whole time while I was building it, it just lashed it down. It rained so bad. Then the amount of wood which disappeared into this, it used to be a sort of running joke. He was saying, you know, there's that much wood in it, we could have built the Ark. The amount of times my garden was just filled with planks which ended up going into this building. Wood just kept on disappearing into it. An incredible amount of wood went into this. And the third reason we called it the Ark is because, well, one day I was working on the roof of it, and 2 squirrels came running past me and almost made me fall off the roof. I ended up dropping my mobile phone, which smashed to bits. I was okay, but I thought, great, okay, we've got loads of wood, it's starting to rain an awful lot, and now the animals are coming past us 2 by 2. I thought, we've got to call it the Ark, and hopefully it will be a place where there's something of God's presence. And when we first started using it, I was running a men's group at the time, and we used to meet in there. So it has been used, but maybe not quite in the way we first intended. But this thing took loads of research, loads of planning. I had the idea for it, but we had to research, we had to plan it, we had to look at different ways of building it, look at other ways that other people had done the same sort of thing. Never mind planning permission and all that stuff, but we really had to work through this process of, of going from vision to reality. And I just want to share with you some of that process. I'm going to put a little graphic up as well. I always imagine developing a vision as being as if you are taking a walk up a big hill. Because sometimes when God gives us something, it looks like this massive, looming, intimidating thing in front of us that we have to try and deal with and handle and work through, and it can just be so intimidating we don't know where to start. But you know, as we take each step, if you're walking up a mountain, you walk 10 steps and you're further up the mountain than you were when you first started. But it's so important to start taking those first steps. If we don't do that, we're never going to get to the top of the mountain, and we'll just stand there looking up at it the whole time being intimidated. It's so important that we just make a start where we can. So my hope is really that through some of this, that it's just a little nudge, maybe just an encouragement to at least make a start and start walking in some of the stuff God might have given you. So as you see in the graphic, there's a few different stages in it. There should be one which is vision, and then the picture moves on to survey, plan, resource, walk and view at the top of the graphic that you'll see. So if we're going to start with things with God, first of all, we have to have that vision. And how God gives us vision can be in many varied ways. But I think so often that when it comes to vision, whatever else is going on in our lives, it's so often that we sort of keep on getting drawn back to it. It's a little bit like a compass point. Whatever else we do, we keep on getting drawn back to the same thing. And I always say to people, look out for touchstones. What I mean by a touchstone is something which is outside of ourselves, which confirms what we believe God is saying. It's because however we receive whatever God's saying to us, it's good that we have something exterior to us which confirms what we're supposed to do, so that we're not just caught up in excitement, we're not just caught up in enthusiasm or anything else. It's so that we know outside of ourselves, outside of our own feelings, our own whatever, that God is saying something and God is confirming it. So always look for touchstones, always look for something, you know, through reading the Word, through other people, just things to help us know that God's actually saying whatever it is he might be saying. But it starts with that vision. And when we have vision, it's so important that we write it down. Habakkuk 2 verse 2 talks about writing down the vision so that a herald may run with it. Just in the actual act of writing down, blurbing, just trying to get out of us what it is that we're actually thinking. It's amazing how just doing that little process helps make the vision clearer to start with, before we even do anything else. That seems to clarify stuff and bring things together. So I would always suggest to people that the very first thing they do is they write down the vision, write down the idea, and try and bring that vision from a big blurb down to some real focal points to help them keep a very specific aim, to help them remember what it is that God's saying, to help them remember the direction. For me, I always give things a name. Sometimes I even give it a little graphic, a little sort of logo, and maybe even a tagline. Just something to help me remember it, to help me embed what I believe the vision is. We've done the same with Essence. I do it with almost everything I'm involved in. Try and do that same process. So write the vision down. Try and make it clear. Write it down. The next step is what we've called survey. Now, what I mean by that is, if we've got an idea, it's great to see what other things are out there which may be similar, which might be quite like it. Because again, as we look at other things, we start doing a bit of research. That helps us clarify what it actually is that we want to do, what we believe God is saying, and also what we don't want to do. There may be things out there which are very similar, but we believe God is asking us to do it differently. But it's so important that we survey and we take a good look around to see what else is going on. Also to make sure that if God has given us a vision, it might be that that vision matches what somebody else is doing and we should just simply get involved there. Or it might be that we have to start it up ourselves. But if we don't survey, we don't know. And it's also so important, I think, to be kingdom aware. so that if somebody else has got something and they've got a name for it, that we don't give our thing exactly the same name, because it's about us being kingdom and working together, not just trying to flag up what we're doing and stuff what everybody else is doing. It's so important. So that's all part of this survey phase, the research. Find out what's out there. Find out what is like what we believe God has said to us. And to put all that stuff together, so we sort of have like a file or a noteboard. There's 101 creative ways of how you can do this survey and research phase. But it's so important that we bring all that stuff together. So we've got some sort of document, some way that we can look through it, and again help us to clarify what it is that we're supposed to be doing. So that's the survey phase. Next comes the planning. So once we've done that survey, the research, it's good to start planning what we're actually going to do. And the planning and resource phase almost sort of overlap, but planning what we're going to do, where we're going to do it, how we're going to do it, what it looks like, who's going to be involved, and then what do we need to put in place to make that happen. It's just so important that we actually plan it rather than just thinking it's all going to come together. We actually have to make sometimes 101 different decisions en route to what it is that God might be saying. And sometimes we just need to plan. If we've got a long-term plan, sometimes it's breaking that down into loads and loads of little steps, because looking at the whole big plan of it all can just become completely overwhelming. It's so important that we break it down into little achievable steps, like taking those little steps up a mountain. It's an essential part of the plan that we set ourselves little goals, little achievable steps to help us en route. You can't jump to the top of a mountain, but you can take many steps to the top. It's that sort of principle. So as we plan, then we have to start looking at our resources. So what do we need to get the vision done? That can be physical, that can be financial, that can be manpower, that can, of course, touches the realm of, well, who's going to be praying for it? How is it going to be covered in prayer? Who's going to look out for us en route as well? Have we got the skills required? Do we need to learn more things? Do we need things like insurance? All these questions have to be asked in the resourcing phase to make sure that we've got what we need to help do the job. For instance, if somebody was wanting to paint a painting, even that takes some planning and resourcing. You need your canvas or your board. You need to make sure that the paint you're going to use is going to stick to that board. You need to get the paint. You need to have the right brushes which are going to work for it, as well as the idea of what you're going to paint on there. If you put all those things in place, it's far easier than when you have a moment of inspiration to get the canvas out, get the paint out and get started. It's much more difficult if you suddenly have a moment of inspiration and you haven't got any of that stuff in place. So resourcing, hugely important. The next part, the next phase though, is to begin walking it out. Sometimes you can have all the vision in the world, you can have all the planning, all the research, all the stuff there together, but unless you start doing it, all it's going to do is sit there gathering dust. Sometimes that initial stepping out into the thing which God has told us to do is very scary. And if we just look at all the stuff around it, it's like when Peter's asked to walk out to Jesus on the waves. When we look at all that stuff, it can become so intimidating, but we have to take those steps. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere at all. Now, when I talk about walking things out, sometimes when that comes to a vision, depending on what it is, the walking out phase could be a prototype. So, for example, say somebody wanted to run some sort of course. You could do a prototype of that with some people who could give you good feedback on it. Just like if somebody's trying to create a model, a new car, they prototype it first before the big launch of the final thing. It's so important that even in our walking out that we put little steps in there. So maybe somebody wants to put on a massive art exhibition. Well, maybe start smaller, just to be able to start walking that out rather than thinking that they have to jump to do the big thing straight away. put in place, again, little steps to help with that walking it out, to help with that process. And the prototyping phase is really important, whether it's a group, whether it's a bit of artwork, whatever it is. I like this idea that even if we go back to the story of Noah, I wonder if he made small little models first of all. I don't know, but I like that idea that he at least prototyped it, gave it a little go to help him walk towards the big picture. So, hopefully you finally arrive at the top of the hill where you've at least prototyped, if you're not already walking in the big thing which God has said to do, that big vision. And when we get there, I think it's a really good time to take stock of it all. Sometimes people get into something and then they're just on the run. But I think it's so important that we take time, first of all, to be thankful of where God might have brought us to reflect on the process. Because so often when we do things, it's not just about us. The process can be there to help other people en route as well. And it's so important to look back. I think when we look back at how things have gone and we reflect on things, that can be one of the greatest areas that we grow in. You know, would we do things the same? Would we change things? Should we change things ongoing? What have we learnt en route? There's loads of questions that we can ask when we're at that point, when we've done something, when we've maybe got that vision going, which can help inform us for the next part of the phase, the next thing that we're going to do, or even inform how we're gonna continue to shape the vision as we move on. It's really important to take those times to take stock and reflect on how it's going, rather than just rattle on. Things are so easily lost in the sands of time. It's important that we don't, and that we give opportunity to think and to ponder and to be thankful. So hopefully this idea of this vision to reality, this little bit that I'm talking about with the planner will just help at least provide a little bit of a framework to maybe encourage you to walk through some things. So start with your vision, survey, research, planning what you're going to do, who's going to be involved, how it's going to work, making sure you've got the resources in place, walking it out, giving it a go, prototyping if necessary, and then when it's in place and you're walking in the thing, take time to take in the view, because you don't know where God may take you next. I think it's just necessary for me to say that on this route of going from vision to reality, it's not necessarily going to be the easiest path to take. But I think it's far more rewarding than just going through our lives and maybe missing out on what God's best is for us. But there'll definitely be some battles en route. There'll definitely be some obstacles to overcome. And I often think that the route, if you like, in walking something out with God can be a little bit like crossing the desert. There's these times when you hit the top of a dune and you can see it over the top clearly, and you've got a real good idea of what it looks like and the direction you're going, and then you go down the other side of the dune into this sort of valley, and it can be a bit dark and you're not sure which direction is which, and everything which is difficult about the situation becomes more pressing on you and in your face. And the question is, what we do then? Well, you keep on walking. The opposite to that is you either turn around and go back, or you just stop. But when we just stop, something inside us dies and something inside us goes amiss, and we end up in more of a mess than if we'd never even started en route. But it's so important that when we hit those troughs in the dunes in walking out our vision, that we just keep on walking forward with what we know. See, that's an act of faith. Walking sometimes, or investing in the dark when we can't necessarily see the light ahead. It's that we keep on going, keep on walking it out. And there's just a couple of notes I wanted to make at this point, just regarding some of the creative battles that we'll all have en route. And this can be, whether it's going from writing a poem to making something ceramics or setting up a big exhibition or anything. It can be the same battles that we'll face en route. And the first is the intimidation of a blank canvas. You know, sometimes I've experienced it myself. You get out this lovely white clean canvas and it can be so intimidating to even make a mark, and we have all these questions. Well, what if we get it wrong? What if we don't do something right? What if we get halfway through it and then mess it up? Will anybody even like it? And that's even before we've put pen to paper or brush to canvas. And the intimidation of a blank canvas can be awful, but it's so important that we at least make a mark and make a start. That's the first one. Second one is distractions and other ideas. If you're creative, you can get maybe a tenth of the way through a project and you have another idea for something else, or you get distracted by something else that you feel enthusiastic about, or that interests you, and then the initial idea you had gets lost in these sands of time and lost in distraction. So linked with that battle of distractions and other ideas, we also get the another battle which comes from the lack of completion. Now sometimes when we keep on moving on into different ideas and we don't complete something, that creates a frustration and doubt and a battle in and of itself as well, because we feel like we're never actually fulfilling something. We're never actually getting something done and bringing it through to completion. And just being able to bring something all the way through to a reality just gives that sense of achievement, like we've got there, and helps us to be able to let go of something. It helps us to be able to rest on whatever particular project that is. But it's so essential that we're able to bring things to completion, and sometimes that is just going to take walking it out and walking it out and walking it out until it's done. Because if we don't complete. And when we don't complete something, we get frustrated. So we move on to something else to deal with the frustration. But then, if we don't complete that next one, it adds more frustration. And we just end up in this perpetual downhill spiral where things aren't completed and we're continuously frustrated. It's so important that we're able to prioritize time, energy and effort, and be disciplined to bring things to completion, because that just helps us in a whole variety of ways, but also just to move on with the things that God's got for us. Another battle that we're often going to find as well is this doubt about the value of what we've actually done. I think, is this going to benefit anybody? Is it any good anyway? It's not quite the way I wanted it to be. It doesn't look exactly how I imagined it or pictured it in my mind. And sometimes we doubt the value of what we've done. There's been bits of artwork which I've done over the years which I didn't necessarily think were particularly good, but other people have loved it and it's blessed them. And when God's asked us to do something, I think God's word never returns to him empty. If he's asked us to do something, even if he's the only person who sees it, sees the effort, sees the energy and our hearts that we've put into it, it's still worth it because God sees it. So I often think of when my kids were little, and they'd make a little painting for me in school. It might not have been a Leonardo da Vinci, but I loved it because they did it and because they put it together. And I think God is the same with us. He loves what we do. Because first of all, we're his children. But secondly, when we do the thing for him, his heart is blessed. And I think that gives it value no matter what we do. But it's so often one of those things that people will go through, that they doubt the value of it, whether or not their project, idea, vision is actually going to do any good. But if God said it, he's the one to worry about. He's the one to worry about the fruit of whatever that vision is. Another battle is feeling overwhelmed by a project. And again, that goes back to the standing at the bottom of a mountain and looking up at the top of it and seeing the size of it and how big it could possibly be. I think sometimes people have likened this to being sort of like being in the middle of a battle. It's often said that people who are brave, it's not that they didn't experience fear, but it's that they experienced fear and did it anyway. And I think there's some truth in that when we do the things of God, it's not that we're necessarily going to feel 100% peaceful about it. It's not that we're not going to feel frustrated about it, or it's not going to be a battle, or it's not going to be hard, but that we do it anyway. And sometimes when we feel overwhelmed in a project, I think one of the best things we can do is just try not to look at the whole picture, but just think, okay, it's massive, but what can I do about it today? What's the one thing which I can do today which will help towards the big picture of the project, and just to concentrate on that one bit. Because if you get that one bit done today, one bit done tomorrow, one bit done the day after, then again it's about completing those small steps en route to fulfilling the big project. Another area of battle is often the place where, if you like, the gap between seeing where things are at and what we imagine the finished picture or finished vision to look like. There can always be such a tension between that, where it's at now and where we want it to be, the have and the yet to come. And I think that's one of the things which is always going to be there and is part of having vision. But it's important that we try not to be overwhelmed by the tension of where it's at, and to accept where things are at, but always be looking and praying, planning, looking towards the future of where the vision will be. But also not to belittle the day of small beginnings as well. I think that's such an important concept, to not despise those days of small beginnings, the smallest project, the smallest effort, the smallest thing that we've done, not to belittle it. And if we can not belittle it and just do the best that we can where we are at the moment, and then trust God for the next step and just keep walking towards it, I think that's probably the best thing we can do as far as dealing with that tension of where things are at and what the final thing looks like, and to keep on giving it to God, because so often if it's a project from God, He's invited us to be part of that. It's His and should always be His, not ours. Hopefully that helps. But one of the other things which can help with that as well is sometimes we have a picture of what things look like in our heads, and this can be down to creating a piece of artwork. We have a picture of what it looks like in our heads, but then actually communicating that into reality and onto a piece of paper, or if it's a vision, trying to get that from the way it looks in there to the way it is in reality, can often be quite difficult. And sometimes I think that's where we really need to invest in our own skills, invest in the resources, invest in our understanding of a situation to help us be able to communicate what's in there onto paper, into vision, into reality. And I think that can be the same for artwork, just the same as it can be for going from a vision to reality as well. Another area I think which is a battleground is the place of letting it go. Especially when we're creating a project for God, and it can be the same with artwork as well. It can be like our little babies. It's like a bit of our heart that we've brought into the world and we put out there. And especially with creative stuff, there can be a tendency to over tweak and to keep on tweaking, and never actually letting go of it and saying, right, that's the best I can do at this moment, and just put it out there and let go of it. Sometimes it's almost like we want it so much. We want this thing to become whatever it is. We want it to become and be so much that we strangle the life out of it. And there's a need sometimes to just do the best that we can at the moment and let it go and leave it with God. Because in so many ways, the best that we can ever do is one thing, but we always need God to do it. We always need God to bring the best out of anything that we can do anyway. And it's almost like we just are unable to let go of it, as if it's not good enough. And especially with artwork, some bits of artwork, as creatives, we always see all the mistakes we made in it, where somebody else won't. But if we're continuously tweaking it, one of the things I often find is that if I keep tweaking something, I end up making it worse. I have to bring it to a point and just feel like, okay, that's done what I wanted it to do. It communicates what I want it to, and then let it go. And almost just like give it to God. And I physically sometimes have to say, right, that's the project, that's the idea, God, over to you. I just have to let it go sometimes. I think some of that sometimes takes embracing imperfection. We want it to be perfect, but sometimes it's not going to be as perfect, at least as we imagine it to be in our heads. And sometimes we have to embrace that and say, do you know what, it's not perfect, but there it goes. This is the best I can do at this moment with the time I've got. And you know, I feel that at the moment, even with creating these videos ready for Essence, that I'm doing the best I can with the time I've got, and they're in no way perfect, but I just hope that my faltering steps in trying to bring this stuff together is helpful to somebody in some way. And at least for this section of this video, at this point, I'm going to let it go. Just one last thing before I finish this video. I really want to encourage you to do the best that you can, whatever it is that God has given you. There's that parable of the talents. And I think it's so important that we don't just bury our talents, we don't just bury a vision that God has given us. It's so important that we treat it the best way we can and do the very best that we possibly can with it, to whatever it is. It doesn't matter whether you think that your vision is such a small thing, or you think that you're small and not able to handle it. You know, God can help you do amazing things. God can take some misfits and scallywags like the disciples and use them to change the world and to launch the church. Please don't ever think that what God has given you is not good enough, not big enough, because even if we're only given something very small, God can take that, develop us through the process, and use it to make a big impression. Use it to do something really significant. And it's really important that we don't get caught up in what is considered to be worldly success as well. I think the very first thing that we can do to be successful is to understand that so much of what we do is for the audience of one. If God has told us to do something, we should do it simply for Him, regardless of whether anybody else sees it or not. The very first thing we're always called to do is to be obedient and let God worry about the fruit of it. So whatever it is that you've got, whether you think it's big or small, please just start walking in it. And I hope that this video has just been a little bit of an encouragement with that. And I really pray and hope that God takes you on an amazing journey and a fantastic adventure with Him.